And so with us this week, coming from Canada, and of course, we were just telling her off mic, we're sorry we have to do this recording so late because they're in our time zone at 9 o'clock at night. But we are so happy to have Justine Smith joining us on this podcast today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Our pleasure. You're a name I've heard around, and when we had Alexandra on, Alexandra Hella Nicholas on, she messed up your name, and so that was definitely spotlighting it. I like to just shout her out. She'll think that's funny, but yeah, I've noticed recently you've been popping up on some special features and some physical media. Recently, when we talked to Alexandra, we talked about Gina, and you did some work on that, and then I've also seen that you've done some work on you did one of the films in the Twisting the Knife set. I think it was Nightcap.
Yeah,
Did you do? Yeah,
exactly.
you did an audio commentary, I believe, on that one, and
hmm
then you did Videophobia, which is a Blu-ray I got, but I haven't watched it yet, and you did some work on that one. And then, of course, you're a writer. You're a film writer. You've worked at many different outlets, but one of the main ones is Cult MTL, and then of course you're one of the curating people over at the doing the underground stuff over at Fantasia Film Festival. So that's great. That's great that we just had Lisa Dreyer on from Fantastic Fest. We haven't released the episode yet, but we just interviewed her, and I just love the film festival atmosphere. And I love anybody involved in. I love that because I've been to one film festival in my life, and probably the only one because I now have a family,
Say it,
and
Steven.
will
You know you
never
gotta
be
bring it
able
up.
to go to one again probably. But I just love that whole vibe and that whole atmosphere, and so let me stop talking and let you
Yeah,
let you
let's let
talk.
our guest talk about herself and all of her things.
So yeah,
I mean,
talk a little
yeah.
bit more about what I missed in that little shabby introduction.
I mean, you touched on a lot of it. I do a lot of freelance writing. In Montreal, I also am on the programming committee of a micro cinema. So we have
Oh,
a
okay,
cafe and 50. I never remember if it's 52 or 58 seats. It's really tiny, but it's very very nice.
that's awesome. I like that.
And yeah, I mean, as you guys mentioned before, I also write porn. That's you have to do a little bit of everything to make a living these
That's
days.
cool.
So
Yeah.
Of
I
course.
do everything.
Well, I mean, that's a thing we definitely are. We realize about a lot of the contributors to the physical media that we spotlight is that most people can't make a real living out of just doing this in one way. Like you have to get many micro jobs everywhere to keep the lights on. Like you gotta
Yeah,
write
you
for
have to
this
be
outlet.
a jack of all trades.
You got to do a
Yeah.
commentary here. You got to do a porn article here. You got to, you got to do your curation for the festival. You got to keep. It's a hustle. It's a
Yeah,
really a hustle.
freelancing is very much self-explanatory. You're free, but you gotta like sell yourself
Yeah,
to outlets and people and places and things, and also like really be your own marketing and hype person. It's a lot of there's a lot of crossover with what we do here on Chasing Labels, where share it on social media like crazy and all that kind of
no,
stuff.
we don't do enough of that.
We
I'm,
don't do enough of it because you also. I don't know about you, Justine, or even Steven here. It's a little awkward to be like, "Hey,
Yeah.
come and listen. Hey, come and read. Hey, do this,"
I just like
because
I like
it
to
could
let
have
the
the reverse
podcast
effect.
speak for themselves. If we can
Mm.
do, if we can get the right people to hear it, then it'll do its thing. But it'll get around. But because I just don't like social media is a tool, but I don't get social on social media, unfortunately. How about you, Justine? Are you very social on social media?
I
I don't.
am actually, but
Are
I
you?
take it. I try not to take it seriously because it's so
Yeah,
easy to just get like totally bogged down. It's an incredibly depressing place.
it can
But I
be.
try to have fun with it. Like I wouldn't say I use it that much for work compared to some of my colleagues. You can easily build such a huge following just by having like a big take or an important point of view on every single topic, every single trailer. I'm not really interested in that, which seems counterintuitive because social media really benefits from like instant reactions.
Yeah,
But I just kind of use it for fun, for silly things, to interact with people I know, people I don't know,
Yeah.
just to discover things. Like most of the articles I find through Twitter, so I do think it has a lot of value. But I also think you have to like take a step back sometimes. If you're angry on Twitter, I don't think that's healthy for you. I don't think it's healthy for your life, for your family, for your loved ones. Just you have to like log off if that's the case.
Yeah, I would assume as being a film writer, a critic, that long form thoughts on things or you know what you want. You want to hear like if you don't want to hear people's like couple little thoughts through a Twitter post to like explain things that they're mad about. You want to, you know, you when you need to talk about something, it needs to be, you know, out there. It needs to be. I mean, honestly, I that's why I like the podcasting because you can really get your thoughts out there. You can really talk about it. You can explain yourself, and it's good for discussion. It's better than just typing a few little characters and hoping to get. I've seen people just get upset for trying to get into to bring up important things on Twitter, and I'm like, and then they get bashed for it, and then people getting on them. And I'm like, what did you expect? Nobody's going to have a real meaningful conversation on Twitter. I'm
Hmm.
sorry, it's not. It's
It,
rare.
it's very difficult to get out any nuance in such a short
Yeah,
form. You know what I mean? And even in longer articles, sometimes that nuance is lost. I mean, it really all depends on the medium in which someone is digesting it, because people can interpret things in different ways, even if that's not the intended ways. You know
yeah,
what I mean? Someone can read an article and it's supposed to be taken one way, and they read it in a completely different other way.
yeah,
I mean, especially with movies. Movies are so um not digested but um like torn apart or
Hmm.
analyzed very thoroughly in many ways. It's very interesting how that goes. But Justine, I do want to ask you, like, how did you get started with all of this? Kind of go back to your origins, as we like to do, and your childhood growing up and loving movies, if that is was indeed the case.
Yeah, I mean, I did grow up loving movies, and I was very lucky that I lived in like a duplex with so we lived upstairs, and my great aunt and my grandfather lived downstairs, and they were like my whole family was like really into classic Hollywood, so we had like so many VHS tapes of mostly musicals, but a lot of films from that era. And then when I was in high school, I kind of rekindled that love and got really deep into really loving cinema through the library because you could rent as many movies as you wanted for free. And as a kid, as much as I loved like going to the video store and getting a video every week, the cost of it could be prohibitive. So like we were like when we were really young, we would go to the local video store and get one movie a week or one video game, you know.
yeah.
And then suddenly when I'm like, oh, I can go to the library and I can get six a day, it was like it changed everything for me. And at some point in high school, I started to write reviews. I had a blog. And around, I guess, 2007 or 2008, I started to write for other people's websites, but mostly for free. So I started at Twitch, which became Screen Anarchy at some point. It may have had one or two transitions between then. I wrote for a local publication called Sound on Site, which no longer exists. And then sometime around 2014, I started to get paid for my writing, but like very slowly. So it was like two articles a year that got paid a little bit of money. And slowly I built that into a bit more. I wouldn't say like I make a huge amount of money from film reviewing or film criticism. It's like it's not particularly lucrative, as I'm sure you guys figured out too. It's hard to make a living, particularly if you're not staff. And as a Canadian as well, like the limitations of working within my country is pretty tough. Like if I
Mm,
were to only write for Canadian publications, like I could not be a writer. It would be impossible. There just aren't enough jobs.
yeah. Yeah, that seems to. I mean, that I hear that a lot about a lot. I mean, even in America, it seems that people can't just write for one outlet. It's not. It's typically a list of like three or four, that you're kind of rotating out and you're getting articles every once in a while. And the thing that you fight against a lot of times is getting kind of shoehorned into certain type of things to write about. I hear that a lot. They get looked at as the person that talks about horror, or the person that talks about this. so do you find that as a challenge? Do you get kind of feel like you get kind of, put into a box of only getting to asked to write about certain genres, or is that a challenge for you?
Honestly, it doesn't, not particularly with me.
Uh,
It's actually very rare that people approach me to write things.
okay.
So I'm doing most of the pitching, so I get to choose mostly what I write.
Uh-huh.
And I would say, like, in the rare cases that I do get asked because I have a specialty, it's like sex and cinema, which I just enjoy doing, so I don't feel shoehorned. Sometimes horror, but like considering I work for a horror film festival, it's a genre film festival, mostly horror.
Yeah.
Very rare that people
Yeah.
ask me because, and I know a lot about horror, so I find that unusual. And then a lot of stuff is Canadian and Quebec, which I also don't mind doing because I'm happy to support local cinema, and
Yeah.
it's really a passion of mine to share it. So, and again, I wouldn't say it happens that often, like less than once a year for each of
Yeah.
those. So it's not like I am typecast.
Well, so you bring up, sex and cinema, and honestly, that's I feel like a subject matter that needs more voices. It's one that's always gets kind of depending on what part of the world you're in, especially America. We tend to stay away from sexual things in cinema, and so I think if that's something you're well rounded in, it's good that you're getting yourself more out there, for physical media releases too, because there's a lot of labels, that like Severin, they put out a lot of sex films, and Vinegar Syndrome, of course, and so I'd love to keep that's good for you. Hopefully they reach out to you to do more of their stuff, because I think, it's just something that doesn't get enough attention, and so tell us, where did the beginnings of that subject matter for you, start? Like, what got you in that particular interested in that particular sector?
That's a tough question. I guess when I was, it goes back to high school again. My name is Justine, and one of the most famous erotic novels of all time is called Justine by the Marquis
Yeah.
de Sade. And so that kind of came up pretty early in my life. And so I was kind of into the Marquis de Sade in high school, which I guess is like kind of strange, but it's also a very high school thing to be into, I think. And at some point, it's just something that's always interested me. I've always been interested in films in general that are transgressive, and that doesn't always mean sex. It often can be just horror movies. Like, horror movies is among my first loves when it comes to kind of becoming a cinephile, like falling in love with movies in the first place. And I always was particularly attracted to movies that are really just like outside of the realm of acceptability. I really like
Yeah.
hardcore violence or things. I always like, even when I talk about Fantasia, like what I always try to explain is what I'm looking for when I'm watching films are things I've never seen before, and or like experiencing feelings that are incredibly uncomfortable, and that often exists within the realm of sexual representation or um anything really to do with like things people don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
So tearing bodies apart or making love, I guess they're kind of the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, no, I have the same fascination. I haven't gone down the rabbit hole too far yet, but the more I've gotten into different types of cinema, the more I want to, as you say, find things that make me maybe uncomfortable. But we bring this film up a lot, but when I finally got around to watching Irreversible, and just the sexual, the rape in that, the rape scene, we talked about that with Alexandra, you know, about how films like that can make you uncomfortable or make you, if you can relate to a situation like that of rape or something, that even though, for some people it can be triggering, it can also be cathartic, and there are things, of course, I haven't experienced that, but there are other things in my life that I see in film that do cause me to have like a relatability, and don't necessarily make me feel uncomfortable, but they make me feel that catharticness, that I'm not
Mm.
alone, and that it's experienced by a lot of people. And so I am with you. I not only the discovery of just finding what I consider to be good films, but just finding stuff that I've never seen, and trying to find a way to, um, you know, build it up in my library. You know, I call it my library. I have all these films and just trying to find other things to educate myself. And so what would you know when it came to your early, you know, you say horror was kind of your first love. What were some of them first horror films that kind of really, you know, took you and drew you in and really made you more interested in the genre?
I would say it started with something like very simple, like The Birds by Alfred
Yeah,
Hitchcock, which I still find is very scary. Like it's not like viscerally scary, but there's something so taking this like very mundane thing, which are birds, and
I
making
think birds
them
are scary.
birds are scary. Man,
Yeah.
I would like I feel like I'm constantly almost being hit by a pigeon. Like I just like they're like getting lower and lower. I think they're going for the
Is
kill.
that a
I don't
problem
trust
in
them at all.
Canada? Is that a problem in Canada? The pigeons are just.
I think it's a growing problem. I don't know. I feel like I don't know what's going on with the pigeons.
Well, I
Well,
So
think Hitchcock would agree with you. I mean, just the idea is that yeah, the concept behind it, I think, is more frightening in general. Like you're saying, it's just like
Are you saying you own that new Birdemic trilogy set from Severin? Is that one that you're going to definitely buy?
I've never
Because
seen Birdemic. I've never
well,
even seen any of them.
well, it,
we watched them to talk about them on the
for the show,
show,
yeah.
and there's something.
Well,
But
it takes that concept of the birds and kind of dials it up to an even more visceral, horrific idea. You know what I mean? It's yeah, it's very interesting you mentioned Alfred Hitchcock just in general because that was kind of like an early think I think for me as well, just Alfred Hitchcock because he's known as the master of suspense, but suspense and horror kind of go hand in hand,
Hmm.
or like the idea of um, building up that anxiety in an audience member or viewer, and then kind of having that climactic payoff. Like that's always kind of fascinating to me. Please go on before I go on a tangent.
yeah,
Well, I watched a lot of Alfred Hitchcock when I was young. Even my parents showed me a couple. Like we watched Rear Window. I think I was like 10. So like they're kind of horror adjacent, but I think it's kind of like a nice entry point.
yeah.
I was obsessed and still am with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh,
I think
speaking of that, I
Yeah,
have
Stephen Shortoff,
I
please.
have it right here. Look at that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
it's
that's beautiful.
beautiful. So
Yeah,
I just like I'm so it's like one of my like film obsessions. I think it's like lightning in a bottle in film form. I just think it's so horrific and it really still stays scary, and I think a lot of it is that it is so beautiful as well. Like I think that it's really underestimated is like the way where they put the camera and the way they edit. I always now I remember I've seen it so many times. It's one of the movies I've seen the most in my life. But for a while, I would always forget in that like opening sequence in the van where they would cut to like the cows and all of these things. It's like these little ingredients that all add up to this real sense of like almost panic before anything truly horrific happens that I just think is amazing. And the ending, I just like it's just the most beautiful film ending of all time.
Talk about cathartic. That ending, just in the back of a truck, just screaming because of how
yeah.
else does one process the
It's one of
events
the
of that movie?
it's one of the best screams of all time too. Like she's like a scream artist.
Mm.
Just gorgeous.
That
And
that is
horrific.
an art form because some people just can't get that. They just don't have it. Like it's like
Well, there's
I don't
yeah, I
believe
mean,
that you're actually scared here. But that yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I literally just put it in because I had to look at
check it
that
out.
new transfer, and it looked fantastic.
Yeah, it's
So
like
yeah,
the end of Brian De Palma's it's a blow up or blowout,
blowout.
Mhm.
Yeah,
and he just keeps uttering good scream because he finally gets that good scream. I won't spoil how, but I'll just say that gets that good scream for the horror film. What do you? I just have to ask you since you're talking about Texas Chainsaw. What do you think about Texas Chainsaw 2?
I've
Because
never
it's
seen
still
it. I this you know
oh
what?
oh
I have like this weird thing where I don't see a lot of like the second or third movies in franchises. Like people used to make fun of me. Like
good idea.
I saw the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade for the first
yeah.
time like 2 years ago. Like I
Hey,
just
you just
maybe it's
move
that
on. You move on. You move on.
Yeah, you just.
yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I mean, notoriously, a lot of horror sequels are not very good. So, if anything, you're probably
But
dodging
I've heard
something.
so many fun things about Texas Chainsaw 2. I know at Fantasia we had like a secret screening of it when we had the first restoration. Like Toby Hooper was there.
Yeah.
And I did not get to go see it, so that was like on me. I could have seen it in the cinema, which would have been super cool with Toby, but It's life, you know. You
Yeah.
can't make everything.
Yeah.
But that was actually one of my priorities. I would really really love to watch it, and I'll get to it soon.
Yeah,
I would
that
love to hear
Severin
what you
disc
think
is
about it.
yeah, that Severin
Yeah,
disc
because
is good. I mean, not Severin, but Vinegar Syndrome. I
Vinegar
said
Syndrome, but
yeah.
it's because it's so diametrically different than the first one. So just from getting the perspective of someone who's such a big, you know, a fan of the first film, I was just curious what you'd think of something that's very much the complete opposite, yet made by the same director, which is
Yeah.
fascinating because oftentimes you don't get to see a director do a follow up to their original hit film. I mean, John Carpenter never made another Halloween film.
Hmm.
I mean, he was involved tangentially in the newer ones that just came out, doing the score and such and being around it, but it wasn't really
That's
his
the
work.
that's the thing I respect about John Carpenter the most, even though he's kind of a grump, but like it's like he if he doesn't want to do something, the money's not going to bring him back necessarily. I mean, I know he likes money. He continues to do these things that keep his franchise. He'll sell his stuff to somebody else to do it. He didn't care, but like for him
Mm.
to come back and do it, it's important that it needs to be good. Like he won't do it unless he thinks there's a story to be told. Otherwise, he's just going to keep letting other people do their versions of it, and he's okay. He's like, yeah, just cut me the check. It's fine. Like it's fine. But I've always respected him for that because he could have, somebody could have tried to talk him into doing, you know,
Yeah, he could
mo-
have cashed in.
more
I mean, how
a
many
sequel to
Halloween
the
sequels?
thing, or a sequel to the,
Yeah, how many Halloween sequels did we get where he could have done any one of
yeah.
those? Or like you said, the thing being, we did get
Well,
a.
of course, nobody liked that movie at first, so
Yeah,
yeah,
that's another thing. We're talking about things in hindsight. You know
yeah.
what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, and of course, there was eventually a Thing prequel movie that they came out with. Remember that one, Steven?
We talk about
Um,
in recent times where they
yeah,
went
recent
back and
times,
yeah, yeah,
and they went back and did that. That seems to be a trend where we're going back to the world
yeah.
in a
They did it
different
for
way.
Hannibal Lecter too. Hannibal Rising. You
Yes,
remember
yeah, they
that?
did do
Yeah.
that. I mean, that's kind of very interesting. Um, but back to Justine before we go off on
We're going
other
down
things.
she likes horror. We're going down
That's
the
very
we're
true,
going
but
down
I
the
just
rabbit
mean
hole.
like
No,
we
I'm
should
just
get
kidding.
her input on things.
Yeah. So what other horror films you got? Texas Chainsaw Massacre. What else? What else were you
I
really
mean, a
into?
lot of classics. The Exorcist, I was
Of
super
course.
super into, and I was super scared by it. Especially and then I read the book, and the book scared me so much I had to put it down. The Ginger Snaps, I was obsessed with Ginger Snaps. That was like a
Yeah.
very
Is it?
uh teen. It was like around. I was like around the right age, I think, for it.
Yeah, that's so. I think it's underrated, to be honest.
Is that you think one of the best werewolf stories? You think there's a better one?
I think it's my favorite, but
What's
it's
your
like I
favorite?
have such a soft spot for it. But I do think it holds up. I do think it's very funny.
Yeah.
And the gore is really good for what they have because it's like a small budget Canadian film. It's like they're not working with too much. And it's really those two performances though. I think and even the supporting cast, like it's a really solid movie that I think just holds up really well to multiple viewings and holds up over time too. Like even to this day, I think it has something special, and it's very strange to me that even though it has these two sequels, but I feel like a lot of movies didn't try to replicate it, even though I feel as though like for so many people I speak to who did make horror movies after 2000, particularly in Canada, particularly women, it's like it is a huge reference point, but I can't really say like, oh, it had this like huge impact on the way people made movies because it kind of just nailed it. Like I
Yeah.
think it just like did it so well.
Are you a fan of? I'm a big fan of The Descent. You like The Descent?
I like The Descent. I don't love it. Like I
Oh,
actually prefer. I know.
no, it's
I don't
okay.
know. It's like, but I think part of it. I love the first half,
Uh,
and I find it it's like so viscerally horrifying. Like I'm never going in a cave. Like you
hell
couldn't
no.
pay me.
No, no, thank you.
You could not pay me to go into a cave, especially like a cave like that.
Not even,
No
not
No.
even,
fucking
not even
way.
the big open part of it. I don't even want to begin. None of that stuff. I don't even. Why would you want to go through the little tunnels like that? No, it's stupid.
Yeah, spelunking does not seem fun to me.
I
Being
don't
in cramped underground caverns. No,
I
thank you.
never want to die. I don't want to do anything that if I die, it's embarrassing. Like it's like one of those things. It's like, and I'm like, you know what? Like I'm on the record saying that like it would be embarrassing for me, not for everybody. Like if you're really into it and like this is your life and you want to go into caves and you're saving people and you're that's your whole thing.
Oh yeah,
Me,
yeah.
I'm
It's
none of those
different. Yeah.
things. If I go into a cave, I'm not experienced. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm scared. If I die, it's embarrassing because I shouldn't be in a cave. Like it just is. It's. I just think it's a fact. It should not happen.
Yeah. No, yeah, just yeah, we don't want to die doing something that we've maybe said on a podcast that we should never be there. You know, we've
Exactly.
obviously said that we should not be doing that, and it's now really on the record that if we ever find Justine obituary and that she died in a cave spelunking accident, you know, then
She
she
kind of
messed up
deserved
somewhere.
it.
She messed up somewhere. Um,
Well,
somebody really talked her into it, but
yeah,
yeah.
someone must have paid her a significant amount of money to do it.
Yeah, but
Uh,
yeah, so yeah, any other ones you got Ginger Snaps, Texas Chainsaw, you know, The Exorcist. The one when you bring up The Exorcist, and I know a lot of people were big fans of that third Exorcist film, so that's one you maybe need to get around to as well if you
I've
haven't seen
seen the
it.
third one. I've never
Okay,
seen the
you have seen
second
okay.
that
one.
one.
I haven't seen the
Okay,
second one though. I've seen parts of it. It used to be on TV all the time, like late
okay,
night television, The Exorcist 2, and I was I guess I still am. With Richard Burton. He's in
yeah,
it, right?
yeah,
Yeah, so I'm
Yes.
like,
mostly, yeah.
but I was always like, I'm like, oh, I don't want to ruin Richard Burton or The Exorcist. But I know some people who like The Exorcist too. I think it's
Okay,
like very campy, right? It's like
it's an
it's not a
interesting horror franchise. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's an interesting. It often does get overlooked for the third film. The third film isn't the third film directed by the author of the book, I
Yeah,
believe
the
Peter
third one's
Brady.
good. The third one is really unsettling, and it's a departure. And I think a lot of the good horror sequels, you kind of have to do something a little different. Kind of talking about like even the Texas Chainsaw Massacre too. Like I know it's even tonally incredibly different.
Yeah.
Um, I think that that's like the key to success. Is like you kind of take the elements that make it integral and just reinvent it a little bit. And The Exorcist 3 is really creepy, but it's like very thoughtful
Yeah.
and reflective. I,
Yeah,
I think
I
it's
think a
really
big
great.
yeah, I think a big example is Evil Dead. Evil Dead
Yeah.
for small beginnings, and then they kind of remake it, but it's got like even more humor and even more just weirdness in it. And then of course that third movie really
Army of
changes.
Darkness.
Yeah, Army of Darkness really changes it up.
Yeah,
And
I find myself being more of a fan of Army of Darkness out of the trilogy. Oh,
yeah,
that's the one I rewatched the most, I would say.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, the first Evil Dead film is straight horror, like to the bone, like straight horrific, and the second one is a horror comedy. And this genre kind, and then the franchise kind of took that horror comedy vibe and just went with it,
And then
even up to this
Fetty
day.
Alvarez as his remake
Brought it back.
was back to that straight up horror. Like
Mhm.
I was
yeah.
actually talking about that movie the other day, and because it's the 10-year anniversary of the Fetty
Oh, okay.
Alvarez Evil Dead film. And I was like, I still wish that they would have made a sequel to it because they set it up for a sequel,
Well, you know,
and then they did Ash vs Evil Dead, and they were just like, we're just gonna go with this now.
Evil
And
Dead
then
Rise is coming out, and
yes,
I don't know if it's gonna have any reference to that last movie, but I don't know. I mean, I'm interested in that. Have you heard anything good about that new Evil Dead Rise,
Yeah, I think
Justine?
it's played a little bit, and I do think that some people really like it. But it's also like again, as someone who goes like works at horror festivals, I don't trust buzz on horror films
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a tough
because
one. Yeah,
well, it's because
horror
the,
buzz is tough. Yeah,
because usually the early screenings are shown to horror fans. Horror
yeah,
fans are,
it
as you know, just very specific taste. You know what I mean? It'll be great to them, but how is it going to play to people who are maybe not quite horror fans, or maybe kind of more mild horror fans, or
yeah.
something like that? It's a different perspective.
It's kinda like the Disney reactions, like, when you have the really early screenings of the new Marvel movie or the new Star Wars, it's like, I'm always a bit apprehensive because there's that, like, fine line between punditry and fandom. I do think it's like I don't wanna, like, disparage these critics because I do think that horror critics are way more niche and it's not the same thing as, like, industry professionals. And, like, what they're interested in is, like, you see in the work that they do, they really just go in depth in it. They're, like, very like, the most dedicated fan base. I, like of, like speaking of, like, physical media, if you wanna see a group that loves physical media and is gonna, like, go to the death to save it, it's the horror fans. Like,
oh
they
yeah,
are
yeah.
above and beyond, you know? So it's like I'm apprehensive, but it's also because like I've been burned so many times. Like I just want to
Oh yeah.
keep my expectations low.
I was literally just going to say that where I've heard both sides of the things happen. I've heard early screenings being like, "Oh, this movie is amazing, incredible, best movie that's upcoming," and
I
then the
never
buzz
believe
is really
anybody
hot
that
for it.
says that though.
I've
It didn't matter
that's what
what the
I've heard.
movie is.
And then it comes out and it gets trashed by critics and people
Hmm.
alike and then all that. And then I've heard the opposite where, oh, this is a terrible mess. And they had to do reshoots because it was such a mess and and the screenings didn't like it. But then it comes out and people love it. So I've heard of both things
It's
happen.
yeah, you just got to go see it for yourself,
Yeah, make
ultimately.
up your own mind.
You know, we have brought it up a couple times. You know, you working for Fantasia Film Festival, and so please tell us how you got worked into doing that.
It's a long story. Actually, the first writing I ever did was for like as a critic was for Fantasia. It was the first film festival I ever attended. I live in Montreal, so it's also here, so it's not that much of a
Perfect.
burden. And yeah, exactly. And I think it was like almost 10 years just covering the film festival that eventually someone offered me, they did a shortly lived television show and I did that.
I saw
And
your videos on YouTube
oh
of you.
no.
It's cool. I mean, it's fun. It's a cool thing, though. It's cool that you're having discussions about certain filmmakers. I saw the one you did on John Waters, talking about John Waters stuff.
Oh,
It's
you're bringing up my keywords now.
I know, yeah, yeah.
I mean, literally, I've got Pink Flamingo sitting next to me at all times,
Uh,
just as motivation. Um,
Just motivation, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I mean, that's you know, I mean, it's fun. It's a fun thing that you were doing there. I'd love to see you keep doing stuff like that. So
yeah, I don't mind. It's just it's always that thing. It's can be awkward to see yourself on camera, and
sure,
it's always like the change. And then so I did that for a while, and then at some point, someone offered me. It was like Mitch, who does he's like the I think he's the official title is like creative director, but he's also the head programmer for the international section. And so I kind of joined a committee, and then I eventually got the underground section. I don't believe I know it was in 2020 because I had like the first 2 years as a programmer. None of my films screened in a movie theater, so this will be my second year with films in a theater. So that'll be really cool.
yeah, yeah.
nice.
So go through the process of what your day to day, you know, if you can, you know, with what you do when the festival's, you know, in its when it starts and when it, you know what you do you host you also host some of the screenings and things like that.
Yeah, so Fantasia is actually incredibly long for a film festival. It's like around 20 to 25 days. So it's a month. It's very, very,
Yeah.
very time consuming. So on a normal, our screenings start depending on the day, but like they can start as early as 11 a.m. But I would say most weekdays closer to 3. And I am presenting films. If we have guests, I'm sometimes working with them. And there's often stuff like, especially with my section, because I am very rarely dealing with stars or big names. They're films that are a bit harder to sell to an audience because you can't be like, this is the new John Carpenter, because they're
Yeah, yeah,
like, these are people who've never made movies before, and this movie was made for $10,000 in
yeah,
someone's backyard or someone's garage, which is a cool story. And sometimes like that's enough to get people to go see something, but they have to know that, you know?
yeah,
So a lot of it is also working with like the social media team or the publicity team to try to get people aware of what's playing. And then I do present movies, so films from my section, but I also do other people's sections because I still help, particularly with the international selection. I work with them and sometimes like other sections as well. I think it's like we're a relatively small team and we're all very close and we're all very supportive of each other's films. So a lot of times, like if somebody like in another section knows I love a particular film or I'm available, like I will present that as well,
yeah,
and often host like the Q&As or sometimes other little events. But it's like it changes from day to day, but there's a lot of that. It's super fun. I like
Yeah,
oh
Festival's are great.
I was just gonna say it must be so. I was gonna ask you about how was the prep time to pull on or to put on the festival, do you guys like take like a whole year from the time the last one ends and then just
Yeah,
go right into prep for the next one?
more or less, actually. So I would say we start to receive submission. So we finish like our schedule's been changed a little bit again because of the pandemic. So we've kind of like switched around a little bit, like so we're a little later than we used to be. But we end usually in August. So early to mid August, depending on the year. And we start to open up submissions in October now, I think.
Hmm.
So there's like a month and a half, but in that month and a half, there's actually three major festivals. So there's Fantastic Fest,
Yeah.
there's TIFF Toronto, and then there's Stitches in Spain. Although for Fantastic Fest and Stitches, like a lot of the time, we're not getting films from there, but it's mostly certain members of the team. I've never been to either one of those. Certain members of the team, they go there. It's still like they're still part of the like the networking, and like some of our movies that premiered at our festival end up there. So they still kind of have like a horror life. So people kind of follow that around. And the heavy programming, I would say, starts like in January and ends like in June, and our festival starts in July.
Phew.
And yeah, it's pretty
No
tight.
time
And
off.
no, and like it's I don't know how it is for other festivals, but this year like we have already over a month ago, I think it was like actually towards the end of February, hit our submission record.
No.
So
Wow.
the amount of submissions we're getting this year is already like hundreds, if not already 1,000 more than we have in our record year. And
Oh
we
my goodness.
close, yeah, we close in a month. So it's going to get, I don't even know. Like, we're very, like, we have like a huge team of pre screeners. Like, every single movie that gets submitted to Fantasia is literally seen by at least three people. So,
Wow.
like, we make sure it's like, we like, because it's hard to make a movie. So we make sure that everyone's movie gets seen. It's like it's not an easy thing to like we reject a lot of really fantastic films because like we have no choice but to, or they're not the right fit, or we just have it's just like the volume is insane.
Yeah.
My section is only 5 movies too, so like I like literally it's like that was
Wow.
there's that term of like you have too much choice and then you get like
Yeah.
paralyzed with fear.
So
I'm
it's
like
like when you get it's like when you go to the grocery store and you look
yeah.
at the cereal aisle and you're like, shit. I
What?
only need 2 different cereals, but there's like 100 different cereals now.
I
And
mean, I talk about the percentage of being accepted just by like your section must be incredibly small number. It just yeah, I couldn't imagine um having to screen all those films. Do you just eventually kind of run out of not run out of time, but you reach your accepted is there like a certain number of films that you accept? That's what I'm asking. And
yeah,
then
it's
once you reach
five
Mm.
that number,
five.
do you stop?
Well,
I meant like for the whole festival,
what
Steve.
I
The
do
whole
so it's like
festivals.
I rely I have to, especially like at this point I really have to rely on the pre-screeners and my colleagues. Like again, we work very closely together, so oftentimes there are people who get when we receive the movie in submissions, there are like people who are watching them and they're giving notes and they're giving ratings and they're giving recommended sections. So they will say, I think that this fits in underground.
Mm.
And or sometimes they'll be like, I don't know. So there's like a lot of films that are labeled with like I don't know which section. And so I watch as many of the underground as possible. Sometimes like especially like my list right now is like over 800 movies that
Oh God.
a lot of them are shorts. Like I don't want to like
Phew.
but
Okay, never mind. It's
still
not as bad. Okay.
no, but it's a lot. So
Still a lot. Yeah.
unfortunately, like I sometimes I'm like I'm not watching the whole film. I can't. They are already seen by somebody. And a lot of the time I'm just not watching it because I know it's not going to fit in my section.
Yeah.
I've had to overlook some really fantastic films. A lot of them just end up being programmed by somebody else. And if it's something that I think is really up like my colleague's alley, I'm going to be like, "Hey, definitely check this out if you haven't." Or if it's not categorized under your thing, like I think you would like it. But I don't have the time. I guess like it's just impossible. Like it's an
It is.
impossible mountain of submissions to kind of look at. So it's like it's very overwhelming. It's like it's a good problem to have. Like I'm not complaining and I feel very lucky and it's so cool to be able to discover so many films.
Yeah, I was
But
gonna say that's got to be the funnest part of it is just, and it's what we when we talked to Lisa, it was the same kind of thing I told her. I was like, it's got to be fun to just like you suddenly find like a gem. You're like, holy shit, like this could be like the next, great auteur's, whatever you want to call them, like first film. Like this person's got an amazing vision here, and you like are able to screen their first movie. I mean, that'd be great. Like
Yeah. We did
that's what
Skinamarink last year.
I saw your
Nice.
your your your
Yeah.
your video about talking about kind of recommending that from the festival and stuff. And I'll be honest, me and Andrew have both seen the movie. Or I'll be
Yeah.
honest with you, I didn't finish the movie. It is a tough watch. And I
It's a
have a
unique
baby. I have a
watch.
baby in the room, and I'm like trying to like keep her at bay. And then that movie, I was like, I don't think I can do both of these at the same time. Um, but it's an interesting movie. What I watched of it, I was like, this is different. It really is different.
I mean, that was part of the challenge. Like a lot of people from our team had watched it, and they were not no one was sure. Like even me, I'm like it really fit my section very well, and
Yeah.
I really connected with it. I think I'm the same age as Kyle as well, and we're both Canadian, so we have like even the
Okay.
titles, like we have a lot of the same reference points. But a lot of the section are like a lot of people are like, I don't know if this is too experimental, and even the audience reactions, it's like very much the same thing. It's really in this weird zone that you're like, I don't know what to do with it, you know?
Yeah. Well, please tell us that when you're thinking about what fits your section, what are you looking for?
Yeah, do you have like a checklist of I
Like
don't
kind
know,
of, or you just know it?
characteristics?
It's a feeling. Is it a
Well, yeah, it's a little bit of it is a feeling. I do say it's like kind of like obscenity. I know it when I see it a little bit.
yeah yeah
But I do really, as much as possible, and this is not always the case, I try to privilege actual underground films, as in movies that are made with very little money, very little means, or that could be like in a very literal sense, like a movie that just someone just made again like in their garage. Like I think the film was called Franken Zed. It's a guy who made like a puppet horror movie in his garage for like 6 years. Like you really don't get more do it yourself underground than that. A lot of the films in my section are made for like $10,000 or less, but there are some that are like have distributors or have like
yeah
quasi movie stars. Quote, movie stars is like a really strong term, but like known personalities or are like filmmakers who've made a lot of movies, but aesthetically they're kind of working in that underground thing, whether it's like the imagery is still gritty or the effects or it's something a bit transgressive. It's kind of talking about that other thing that I had mentioned earlier on, something I haven't seen before or something that I feel is like in conflict with kind of mainstream aesthetics. So there's all these kind of different things that are kind of working, and I'm also trying to like balance it within the section. Like I don't want like
yeah
5 movies that are exactly the same or 5 movies that are all American or 5 movies that are all horror movies or all 5 movies that are this. So it's
yeah
like these constant levels of like compromise, and it's very challenging. Again, it's very rewarding, it's super fun, and it's so exciting to be able to share that experience with people. But it's like I'm just like constantly thinking about all the movies that I can't program, and that's also very depressing and scary.
yeah. It's almost like you want to be able to like hold them back. Can I hold on to these for next year, or can I, like? But
Yeah.
then there's going to be like 800 more that come in for next year.
Right.
Well,
But
yeah, and it's the other thing I want to say is like I do receive a lot of movies that I really really love that I
yeah
know is are not the right fit either for my section or even the festival, even if they are like a genre film or a horror film. That so sometimes I'm like I'm kind of on that fence and like I hold on to those movies like maybe a little longer than I maybe should.
yeah
And so sometimes I will contact like a filmmaker and say like, oh, like I really loved your movie, but it's like it's not a fit for either my section or the festival, and I just wanted to let you know that I really loved it, but like I don't think it would benefit. Like I don't want to put the wrong film in the festival
yeah
and kind of have it lost because that can happen too, and I don't think that's necessarily fair to a filmmaker either to get
no
buried because it's the wrong audience or the wrong place for it.
yeah. So though you say your section doesn't typically get movie stars, but of course you're at the festival, the whole time, and there's other people, there's the other films coming in the different parts of the festival. Are there any filmmakers or movie stars or anybody that you've met while working the festival that you're excited, a great memory you've had from your time at the festival?
Yeah, I've met a few. Um, I'm like not that I also because I do it with the criticism too, so I end up meeting people, but it's like very rare that I'm like starstruck.
Yeah,
I think it's like it's very nice when you meet someone who is just very cool or very nice or really likes to talk. Like I interviewed like Ted Kotcheff, who directed Wake and Fright, Rambo, First Blood, and I found that very like I found it a very nice experience. I think he was a very nice man, and he was older, and I think he was like really just like super excited to talk about his movies, and I think that's super
yeah,
cool. So it's like I think a lot like kind of talking about like genre audiences, like they're so excited a lot of the time to meet or see people who maybe have not got mainstream appreciation or have kind of been forgotten a bit by time, and it can be like a very heartening experience. So meeting him was fantastic. The other one was Sam Elliott. Sam Elliott was super cool. He was
yeah.
to me he's like a real movie star too. Like not that I don't meet that many, but like he's like a movie star.
Well, yeah, there's some people that have this, this kind of presence. You can, and they're just, the camera gets on them, and they have this thing, and it's not even, they don't even have to say anything. They just ooze kind of like this. They have a look, you know. I met the only movie star I ever really met in person was Laura Dern, and she was just, yeah, I saw her, and I instantly knew who she. I was like, I saw her, I knew, instantly knew who she was. Of course, I went straight to Jurassic Park. I was like, Laura Dern, like, and yeah, I get it. And yeah, Sam Elliott, that voice, you probably, as soon as you heard his voice, you were like, damn,
Yeah. Well,
like,
also he was it's kind of this. He was like he's very present. Like and this, I feel like I'm talking like in like weird like California hippie, but he every single person he stopped and is like, "Hi, I'm Sam," and he shook their hand and he goes, "What's your name?" And then they would say their name and he'd go, "Nice to meet you, like Steven."
yeah.
And he would like maintain eye contact with you, and you were like, this is like very intense, but it was like it didn't feel fake at all. It felt very like genuine. He was there with his daughter, and you felt like he was just like a very grounded type of person. um
He cared about having a real connection, like, especially, I'm
yeah.
sure, and I know this happens with a lot of, you know movie stars, filmmakers, whatever, celebrities, that, they find themselves not having a lot of real connections with people. People just want to come up, take their pictures, or, whatever like that. And I know, I can't remember which actor it was, but they made a deal. I remember them seeing something about it, and they were like, I don't let people take my pictures. What I do is I either, you can either let me sign something real quick, or you can sit here and talk to me for a second. Like, I'll let you talk to me, but we're not taking pictures. That's like,
Hmm.
I can respect that. Like, you don't want them to just come up and kind of be rude and snap a picture with you and run off. And like, it's like, if you want to you come up to me while I'm either eating dinner or, on my way somewhere, you can at least talk to me for a second. It's like, and I think that that's a good thing. You don't want to look at these people as just being objects that we watch. So
Or yeah,
yeah,
or props for social media, which you
Hmm.
which
often
is what
see.
you immediately do, is go to social media and post it, and like, you're like, oh,
Yeah,
look
and
who
they're
I
like, "Oh,
saw.
look who I
You know,
just met. Look, I was
yeah,
just walking
yeah.
around and they're in the parking lot."
So I could see Sam Elliott being that kind
Or
of
like,
guy.
or you do
Like,
get some of those. It's kind of awkward where you take a picture of someone and they don't know, like a celebrity. If you're
Yeah.
at like a film festival and you see them, I don't know, walking down the street, and then you take a quick picture and then you post that online. It seems a little, I don't know, what's the word, like
stalkerish.
not good social etiquette. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
No, no.
Not
I
good social
agree.
etiquette. I mean, I know, like, when people go to conventions, they pay an exorbitant amount to take, celebrity photos and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. That's something different. You've paid
yeah,
for
yeah.
that.
That's on
That's
purpose. You doing
Yeah,
it?
you
Yeah, it's
went
a
there to
thing.
specifically get an autograph, get a photo, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
It's
it's kind
never
of
my it's
interesting.
honestly never my first thought to get an autograph. Like, it's not like, I literally, if I ever have the chance to meet, if I see somebody, I literally just want to shake their hands and tell them that I like their work.
Right. I mean,
And
in a
like,
way, I guess the photograph is to like preserve the memory,
Well, it's
preserve
to
the
make sure
moment.
people believe you,
It makes
right?
sure people believe you. Like, not everyone's gonna believe this. Like I kind of believe Steven that he met Laura Dern.
He
I
kind
mean,
of believes it.
I don't have any witnesses. I don't have any
Yeah.
anybody who was there at the time to confirm it. But I kind of do
She
believe it a
had a
little
film
bit.
there showing. I can kind of
I
believe it.
I can
Yeah.
kind of believe it.
Yeah.
Steven's
Yeah.
a very honest person in general.
Usually.
Um,
But back to her, but
yeah, back
Justine's
to
experiences.
Justine.
So
I
Sam
mean,
Elliott was one. What's tell me some others, please.
I it's actually hard for me to choose anyone else. It's very nice. Like I got to see Abel Ferrara present Welcome to New York, which was an unbelievable experience. He is larger than life,
Yeah.
and he has a lot to say. He's surprising. He's like very like erratic is the wrong word. He's very like he has a lot of energy.
Yeah.
But he's very thoughtful, and you can tell he loves what he does, and he has a huge passion for making films, and he has so much respect for his collaborators, and his collaborators have a huge amount of respect for him. I know he has a very troubled past, and he's also can still be a bit difficult sometimes, I've heard.
I've heard that too.
But
His films are unique to say the
yes.
least.
So that was really fantastic. I was really sad I missed out on meeting Zulawski. I had two
Mm.
chances to meet him and I missed it twice. And unfortunately he passed away, but he's one of
Yeah.
my favorite filmmakers. So that's the someone who I would have been starstruck by.
Yeah.
I think
It's
there's certain
go
people
ahead.
I'd be starstruck by. I mean, if I ever met Martin Scorsese, David Lynch,
Yeah.
Yeah.
people like that, I think I would be. I wouldn't know how to approach them. You know what I
Oh,
mean? If
I do. I just walk up to him
well,
like, "Hey,
Steven's got a
man,
lot more
what's up?"
courage than I
Oh,
do.
I don't have no problem with it. I've done it my whole life. Like when I've gone to see bands play, like and I always typically go for like the small venues to see a band play. So I have that opportunity, whether they're like popping off the tour bus or whatever. I don't care. I'm just like, we're paying money to see them. I mean, they know we're fans. Hey, what's up, man? They
Right.
just want to talk to normal people, and they want you to treat them normal,
I
and
will
just
say this.
come and say hey.
Yeah,
Like
very eye opening about doing this podcast here and meeting a lot of people that I never thought I'd get to meet. Um, they're normal, which is surprising. You know what I
of course
mean?
they are.
They're normal people where
Some of them are not,
you
but
put them
some
up
of
on a
it.
pedestal. Well, Justine is clearly unique. I
Yes,
mean,
clearly.
very much
she's
so.
she-
I
she's
but
clearly not like everybody. She's a little. We're having a hard time talking to her. No, I'm just kidding.
right, right.
Um,
But I'm just saying, like meeting. I mean, we bring this about meeting Eddie Muller from TCM. That was always a big thing
yeah,
for me. Being such a big fan of film noir, and then of course watching TCM and how formative that's been for my love of classic cinema. So that was kind of big for me. And then meeting like um, other people like Sean Baker. You know, I've seen all of his films. I never thought I'd ever get to meet Sean Baker, and that was a unique experience getting to talk about his work and then about his newer film Red Rocket and stuff like that. Um, you learn that most of the people that we talk to and most of the people within the industry of movies and entertainment are kind of normal people just
Mhm.
working a job for the most part. Like a lot of the actors and actresses that we hear about or we see in movies, they're just like working, like moving from one gig to another, from one to another, just to make a living and
just
buy
some are just a lot.
groceries and stuff.
Some are just a lot richer
Some
than
are,
they're
yeah,
just a
some on
lot. They're
another
living in
level.
another reality. I think
Some are in
but
another level, like the Tom Cruises of the
Yeah.
world, George Clooney, Julia
not that they're
Roberts,
bad
J
people,
Lo.
but they're living in other worlds.
Yeah, it's a
Uh,
different bracket of
yeah,
society, I guess, or
yeah,
culture. Um, but yeah, I've just learned a lot about that. That there's a lot more things that we have in common than separate us when it comes to the people that we put on a pedestal, really. So
yeah.
so it doesn't surprise me a lot of times when you see someone in the news for something, I don't know, it's not scandalous, but like they say something and it pisses people off, and it's like that's something a normal person would probably say about
Yeah.
some
Yeah,
touchy situation or whatever. You know, it's a no like a that's a normal reaction or a random human reaction.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so that's the one thing I've learned about all this.
yeah. So I know I know this will kind of get weird self-referential here, but we're on a podcast right now, and
True.
I did notice that you said that you were interested in podcasting, getting into some podcasting yourself. Is that still something you're pursuing? Are you?
I it's kind of on the back pedestal because I have too much stuff to do. And it's like
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not I was working briefly with a friend of mine, and like I had it's like it wasn't working, and it's like it's 100% my fault because I'm like mess sometimes,
yeah,
because like my schedule is just like unpredictable, and then it's like you it's like there's always excuses, so it's like technical things. I think if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen when it needs to happen, and
yeah,
until then it's like not worth it. Like I always go through like whenever I'm like gonna write a big article, like one of the things I like to do is I actually like to like go on Spotify and I look up like the filmmaker's name or a subject that's related to it, and I find as many podcasts as I can on the subject, and I create a playlist so that when I'm going on my walks or I'm going on runs or I'm like cooking, I could like listen to that, and it's kind of like research. And you
yeah,
realize how many film podcasts start and have like 3 episodes. And some of them are not bad. It's just like it's hard
yeah.
to commit. Like you really just
It
have to
is.
do it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I always say the one thing about me is finding the energy and motivation. The good thing is, if I had to recommend it for people starting out, is to get someone to do it with you,
Hmm.
because usually they'll keep you motivated, or they'll stay on top of you, or it's nice to have someone to share the responsibility with, share the things with. To be honest, without Steven, I probably would not be doing this because there'd
Oh,
be
he's
no
so
way I would
sweet.
keep up with it week to week, every having that goal in mind to get to the podcast recording times or get to the podcast recording days, because I would put it off, whether it be through procrastination or laziness or lack of energy or lack of motivation. It's tough. So it's like Justine just said, you do see a lot of things start and stop, whether it be podcasting, whether it be
Yeah,
YouTube things, whether it be people who started writing and then started doing a blog, and then they'll do a couple of posts and they'll just one day stop. And it's
yeah,
hard to pick up that momentum again. It
Hmm.
really is. Once you stop, it's hard to start again. Kind of like exercising, really.
Yeah.
Once your body's not used to it anymore, it's hard to get it back up to that level.
no, it's like a lot. I mean, even your writing. When you're not writing, writing's a muscle you have to get good at, and you have to practice and practice and keep doing it, and it's a tedious thing that you have to keep doing, or you'll find yourself unmotivated. And
Yeah, yeah,
fortunately, I've kept us. I was just looking at it. We're up to this would be our we've released 267
Wow.
podcasts. We've done it, Andrew. We're up
yeah.
there.
When you combine our previous podcast, Cinema
That's what
Discovery
I'm saying.
Project,
267
and
combined.
then
Yeah,
with this one, which
yeah.
is
So
this is kind of like a sequel podcast, really, or
it's really become the
offshoot.
main. It's really
Yeah,
become the main thing. We did. It
yeah.
used to do an old one where we kind of had no. It was like it went from talking about broad subject matters about film to talking about one movie an episode, which kind of got me uninterested after a while. I
Mm.
was like, just the making myself watch a movie and then
Hmm.
researching it,
And
and
then dissect it.
it's not a bad thing, but it's one of them things I wouldn't want to do like every other week, like we were doing.
Yeah,
Like
and
I was like,
a lot of people do movie related podcasts and stuff like that, whether it be about, like we just said, movies, like one movie and then kind of dissect it, or two movies
and that's
dissected,
fine every once in a while. I
which
would
is
still like
cool.
to do that every once in a while, but it's like we did it routinely for months, and I was like,
Yeah.
eh.
And
But
we
but
did a
but
whole episode coincidentally about the history of horror, where we went through silent film all the way up
yeah,
through, like, I don't
kind
know
of
if we
more
got quite to modern
modern.
day,
We
but we
probably
went
we probably probably
for a
more
while.
educated now than we were then. We probably do a
Ironically
better
so.
version of that
Ironic,
now.
because you know what's crazy is this podcast has probably educated us more because we got to watch more movies
Yeah.
about that subject matter and other
Yeah,
subject matters. You know, I mean, there's so much more we've gotten into, specifically 80s slashers. They must have made hundreds of thousands of these because there's so many of them,
yeah,
and they're all kind of seeing the light of day now on Blu-ray, which is very interesting, through Vinegar
yeah.
Syndrome, through Severin. Um,
Is there
uh,
is there Justine? What if there was a subject matter you were going to do for a podcast? What was going to be the focus that you guys talked around?
6 in cinema. Like
Okay,
oh,
one
yeah,
nice.
kind of even actually talking about what you mentioned, like the fact that my job is to actually do film reviews and I do them every week. I only can do them because it's like an instant reaction. Like I write
yeah,
2 to 3 film reviews a week for new releases. Um, and if I wasn't paid, I would have a really hard time doing this. And like I
Yeah.
reserve the writing that I actually enjoy to write about like things that I pitch long form, because I don't like to be told what to watch. And like if I were only to do like a podcast on horror or something that is like a bit too specific, I would get bored so quickly.
Yeah.
I really need to be able, like, Sex and Cinema is so broad, like you can kind of almost shoehorn anything into that. You could do a whole series on Marvel and the fact that there's
Yeah.
no sex in it and you could kind of get away with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and ironically, the one movie that did have a sex scene in it is probably their lowest, like, critically appraised film, in Eternals. Um, but that's an interesting kind of genre. Yeah, not genre, but just um, sex in movies and the history behind it, and the different forms it's taken,
Get
especially.
into censorship. You can get
Yeah.
into
Yeah,
all different types of
and just
things
kind
with
of
that.
like how
Yeah.
European cinema kind of is way more different than American cinema or North American cinema when it comes to how they treat it and how they view it and just the culture and society of it all.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating.
We're
I
trying to get
mean,
you motivated to do this
yeah, I guess we're
podcast.
trying to get you motivated. I mean, if you ever do it, we would love to be
I would
guests.
love
Yeah.
At
to
least I
listen.
would.
Yeah.
I mean,
Um,
I'm sure my friend who really pushed me to do it is he like really hopes I do it too. But it's he's like, I worked with him. I actually started in podcasting, so I used to do a radio show
Okay.
with him. I think it goes that was also in 2008 to 2009. It was on a college radio, and then it became a podcast. We did that for a long time. And he's done his name is Simon Howell, and he's incredibly talented as an audio engineer. So he worked with Kate Renenbaum, and they did The Lodgers, which was a Twin Peaks podcast. Then after that, they did one on Chantal Ackerman. I believe they're on a hiatus for that one briefly, but they were going through every Chantal Ackerman film. So it would be with him, and I need to talk to him because I think I haven't spoken to him, and I think he's kind of mad at me. So I'm sorry, Simon, if you're listening to this.
Oh man. Um, so kind of getting towards concluding this, we do got to, of course, bring up physical media again. And so we, like I said, you've done a little bit of work. You're getting a little bit more out there. I know you got some new stuff. You got some work coming out of the Picnic at Hanging Rock release from Second Sight coming out soon. But how does your collection look? Do you have a collection? Is that a thing that you do, or is it just very minimal, just every
um
once in a while?
I'm like, you can see a little. I'm not going to show it. My room's a mess, but like here-ish, this is
Uh-huh.
that little section there is like
Uh-huh.
only my DVDs and my Blu-rays. I actually have a very small collection. I am not much of a collector.
Yeah.
I think because it kind of goes back to I don't rewatch movies that often, and I think that's a large part of it. The only ones a lot of the ones I have are movies that I do. Like I have Texas Chainsaw. I don't have the new release. I have like one of the older Blu-rays, and I have some
Okay.
Criterions. I get people send me stuff. I have that, and then I have things I've done. And then one magical day, I went to the laundry room of my apartment building, and someone had left literally like 3 giant boxes of DVDs and Blu-rays, and I just took all of them.
Whoa.
Yeah,
maybe
there
they
was.
just left them there.
Yeah, I think they were moving, and they were like, it's like kind of like I have a lot more books than I have Blu-rays. Like, it's almost they're like this is like it looks like a closet, but it's like a weird boiler room, and it's like there it's like all there's like I don't know like thousands of books and like a few hundred DVDs,
No, well, I
and
mean, you obviously collect. You are a collector, though. I
I am
mean,
a
I think
collector, yes,
so.
but I used
Books
to have
and yeah,
I used to have a lot more DVDs when I was living with my parents,
yeah,
back in the day, and then I did get rid of a lot of them because it was
yeah.
it's they're hard once you move. It's actually like that's when you're like, oh shoot, like
I bought the house I'm in now to make sure there was room for the collection. That's the main reason we moved to this house. It's like has
It's
to
the
have
only
an extra
reason.
room. It has to have an extra room that can fit my movies. But no, I mean every collector comes in different sizes when it comes to their everybody's got different living situations, money
Right.
situations. You can't not everybody can be
Space.
fully committed,
Yeah.
and I think like you said, you don't always, you're practical about it. I don't rewatch things a lot, so why do I need to have them here? I
yeah.
get it, and then we don't flack anybody, but
Yeah, I
you got
wouldn't
at least
say, yeah.
100 movies. You said you got 100, like about 100 movies. That's pretty
Yeah,
good.
don't
I mean, it's not
I
bad.
wouldn't
Yeah.
judge anybody.
And
For the
there's some
size
that
of their collection. Come
I
on.
really
Size
want.
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, it's like it's like I still have like dream DVDs. The one I want the most, like there's like the collection. It's like if I could have like if I had infinite money, what I
Okay.
would buy is the Criterion Olympic collection.
Oh, the
Oh,
Olympic
With
set.
all
yeah.
the
Yeah.
Olympic films. That's like to me like I don't know, like the holy grail.
Okay.
And I know it's like
Well, you know what?
accessible.
Let's start a Kickstarter. We're gonna make sure she gets this thing
Yeah,
for
exactly.
Christmas this year.
I
Everybody,
mean,
let's get that
wasn't that
going.
that was like 100? No, wasn't that how many films were in that set, Steven? Was that like
It's a
100
lot.
I
films?
think it's like
It's
one
yeah.
almost one for per year. So I think it was
Yeah, and
like $700 at American, which to Canadians is a
Oh,
lot.
it's cheaper than that. It's got to be cheaper than that. Andrew's gonna
see.
look it up.
Yeah, of course I'm gonna look it up.
It's
It's
like 300 and something dollars, isn't it?
let's see, 100. It's about 230
Okay.
American,
Okay, that's
Yeah.
like
which I don't know what it is.
350 Canadian, 400
Right.
Canadian.
I mean, but it is, yeah, it's 53 films ranging from 1924 to 2016, which is it came out in 2017. That's a unique set of films just because you don't really associate the Olympics with movies, but obviously someone was recording the events of the times,
Yeah.
and it's kind of an interesting historical
Some of them
perspective.
are by like really established filmmakers, like Japan. I think in the 70s, Kon Ichiwa.
Oh,
Um, there's one also. The one I really want to see is obviously the Montreal Olympics, the
Yeah.
disastrous 1976. And I just like I'm not even like a sports fan necessarily, but I love sports. Like it's a weird thing. I don't follow sports, but I like to watch them.
You like the idea of like, physically, being enduring and playing game and doing things like in the moment to like,
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. Yeah,
yeah,
like
kind of like the cultural impact of sports is so
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah,
It's just like it's something that's been a mainstay in our culture for so long, even before television was around,
Hmm.
even before radio was around. There were sporting events that people would go to, just as a cultural community type of thing,
yeah.
and it's
And,
kind of
and
transitioned to different forms over time.
and the thing with the
Uh,
Olympics is it kind of goes back to this like, old schoolness, where you got like they're not just like the games that we see all year around, but it's like throwing things and jumping and running. And it's like more simplistic in a way. Like it's more just about like
yeah,
straight up like physical, like, swimming, like,
yeah,
like it's,
it's interesting because we have professional sports, whether it be baseball, basketball, American football, soccer, or whatever, and even those athletes are a different type of athlete than Olympic
yeah,
athletes,
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
and it's like why is that the case? And you're like, it's because the training is different, because the mentality is different, and all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
um it's incredibly
They're
interesting
training for this like one event
to be the
thing that's
best in the world.
yeah, but
You know what I mean?
and it's not for like the sports that these other people play in are for like they play like so many games in a certain amount of time. It's more about endurance over many months, many games, instead of this like one kind of like
Yeah,
event
I
that
feel
where
like
they
Olympic training must be intense.
it's got to be
Like, it's
intense. Yeah.
like every day, 20,
And
365.
welcome to the
Well,
sports podcast.
welcome to the sports
Yeah.
podcast. I did want to ask, kind of transition into, because we've been very fortunate on this podcast, Stephen, to kind of learn more about Canadian cinema just inadvertently through a couple of the labels we've from people who've worked at a couple of labels, Canadian International Pictures. What's the other one, Stephen? Black
Black
Zero?
Zero is the new
Black
one, new
Zero is
label.
another one. I guess I wanted to ask Justine, what, how she views Canadian cinema, and if she and things like that. Since it's something that I'm assuming you grew up knowing, and you're within that industry adjacently. Um, I'm fascinated with the Canadian cinema now, just because it feels so hidden, even though it's probably been around for decades. The Canadian film industry, I mean.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on the Canadian film industry. It's also very complex because I live in Quebec, where we
Hmm.
have our own independent film industry, which is separate from the rest of Canada. That's actually very successful and has audiences and is its own like individual market and is primarily French, of course.
Hmm.
Okay.
And Canadian film is like has just like an insane history, and it actually starts in Quebec. Kind of. There's like different periods, but like the modern section actually started with softcore porn. So in 1969, they released this movie called Valérie, which was a softcore porn, and it was like was a box office smash, and it like benefited from like this new government body that like started to fund films. And so then people, it kind of coincided with nationalism and this kind of liberation from Catholicism and all of these other factors. And so like you have this early period of Quebec cinema, which was Canadian cinema really, that was just like drawing all these people to see like pornography in the movie theaters. And like even one of them, like one of the most famous ones, and I believe it was like the high sold the most amount of tickets of any film in Canadian film history, uh up until Porky's. And if you just look at Quebec, it outsold Porky's, and it was only in like in the 2000s that it got beat. It's a movie called Deux Femmes en Or, Two Women in Gold. And oh, wait, is it that one? Wait, that one was 100% the one that was like the most tickets sold for like decades. But
Yeah.
like the Justin Trudeau's dad appears in one of these movies, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, in like a CFL game, like kind of bringing back the sports a little bit. So there's like a
Mm.
scene in the sports
Yeah.
arena, and like they have all these celebrities in the audience, and like one of them is Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who knew he was going to be in this softcore porn, and like it kind of speaks to this like weird period. Then they had like no taxes for a while, so it's like that's when you start to see like all these really like Silent Partner, all these really like strange low budget but kind of like high profile stars making all these movies in Canada in the 1970s. And then like David Cronenberg and blah
Yeah.
blah blah blah. It's like it's very complex because it's like a lot of Canadian film audiences outside of Quebec don't watch Canadian films, and if they do, it's often by mistake. Like they don't know it's Canadian, and it's like this ever long challenge of actually getting Canadians to watch Canadian films, which is weird because a lot of Canadian television shows are so popular, like Schitt's Creek, Letterkenny.
Yeah.
They have like this international appeal, but the movie they haven't cracked it. But here in Quebec, like in the box office, like we go see movies from Quebec all the time. We're like, if you look at like, you can, there's a way of seeing like the box office though for all of North America and the individual movie theaters that make the most money. And Montreal is often in the top 3. We have one of the theaters that makes the most money per screen.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's because I don't know culturally why that is, but we still go see a lot of movies. But it depends on the film, so sometimes it kind of varies from the rest of the box office. Like we have Dune, we had the #1 theater in North America for
Wow.
obvious
Oh.
reasons because Denis
Yeah.
Villeneuve.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
Denny.
Yeah,
It it's fascinating because Hollywood dominates the movie world, and it dominates it in such a way that you don't like what you're saying is that I would never know that stat had you not say it because I'm always concentrated on domestic box office numbers which only pertain to the United States.
no,
You know
they
what
a
I mean?
lot of
Like,
time they actually count Canada. Canada's
do they
included
count
in the
Canada?
yeah
Probably just to
America.
bump up the numbers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
United States. I'm not sure if this is still the case, but I'm almost 100% sure. I do think that domestic box office includes Canada, so we're like
Okay.
the
Yeah.
51st
It'd
states.
be nice if they
Yeah.
would have see, they don't even specify that.
Of
They
course
don't
not.
even
Of
specify that.
course not.
Like they don't really say that. It's fascinating because, we like I was saying, there's a lot of um Canadian films from the 60s, from the 70s, and then onward and onward that are just I don't think films that people know existed until maybe even now, or probably still don't, because Canadian film history is probably so different than what we learned here from American cinema. You know, what I mean, like you were just saying, this idea of kind of government funded, um, government funds to create films. That's how David Cronenberg got his start. People know David Cronenberg obviously for his other more commercial work, but a lot of his early stuff is funded by
It's
the
still
Canadian government.
funded by the Canadian government. He
And
still gets a little.
it's weird
Yeah.
stuff too, like stuff that I'm pretty sure he just got the funding for and is like, yeah, I'm gonna pitch it one way and make my own stuff.
Believe it or not, I don't think so. I think it's just Canada's weird. I like it's like there's this like
Is that
weird
really true?
thing can like because this is the thing. It's like if a movie's Canadian, there's like an incredibly high chance. Like I would say like 95% chance it is receiving government money. And that includes Cronenberg. A lot of his movies now are co-productions. So like he's
Yeah.
also getting money from like other countries. Like the reason why Crimes of the Future is set in Athens is because he got a bunch of money and tax breaks from the Greek government. But it's still, if you look at the end credits, like Telefilm gave him money. Like he's
Yeah.
receiving money from the federal government of
Okay.
Canada. And I think United States is one of the only countries in the world which is not funded by the government, the majority of film. I think France, no, France funds a lot. Like a lot of governments are giving money to cinema. It's not always in the same way, it's not always on the same level, but America is the exception. And there's advantages to that because you have no oversight. But there's
Right.
disadvantages to it as well, where it's very difficult to make movies that are not commercially like, really viable.
Mm,
So
Yeah.
even if you look like at the history of like Russian cinema, like there's always this question like under like some of the most like oppressive regimes under the USSR, the Soviet Union, how are movies like Tarkovsky films getting made, right? That are pro-religion, that are anti-establishment, often like in some way directly or indirectly against the regime. It's because a lot of countries see soft power as more powerful. So someone
Yeah.
like Tarkovsky was, or Parajanov, who lost his funding because he became less successful, as long as his movies were winning awards at international film festivals, they would let him basically do whatever he wanted because it
mm.
proved that the Russian artist was the greatest artist in the world.
It's about prestige, you know what I mean? It's about
Yeah.
prestige and, like, yeah, if our guy is better than yours, we're gonna continue to prop him up. I
Yeah.
mean, that
Yeah.
that and that goes into, like, international cultural politics of the time and all that kind of stuff. Um, it's very interesting, but here in the US, I mean, I don't know a lot of it. It seems to be state by state
Yeah.
will have their own financial structure or tax structure in place when it comes to film production. That's why you see a lot of the Marvel movies all made in Georgia or Atlanta
Hmm.
in that area because of the way in which the state funding works when it comes to taxes. That's why you see a lot of shows or TV or movies will be say that the setting is New York, but they're really shot in some other place.
Yeah.
Oftentimes Canada, Toronto doubles for New York
Yeah.
so many times. All of
Montreal
the
too.
show Yeah, all of the shows that have come out on the CW network for the last decade were all shot in Vancouver.
Yep.
All of
Yeah.
them. Smallville was shot in
Oh
Vancouver
yeah. Yeah.
forever. I mean, I'm listening to the Talkville podcast now, and they just talk about them shooting
Every
in
episode. Yeah.
Vancouver all
Yeah.
the time, every
Yeah.
episode, certain locations. That
Well,
was the same way.
Transformers in Michigan. Michigan actually used to have such a great deal, and Michigan's was genius because, like, as we know, like Michigan was really hit by like this like economic crisis when you could no longer have manufacturing of cars, and
Right.
so they had this very briefly until they hired. I think it was like in 2000. They not hired, but reelected a Republican who squashed it. So it was 100% tax break, and that was I think to attract Michael Bay to do all the Transformers movies there, and a lot of other filmmakers did benefit from it. But part of that deal that you had to do was you had to invest in infrastructure. So it's like if you wanted, for example, to have like a road, you had to fix the road in Detroit.
Hmm.
And so it's
Yeah.
like it's kind of like I think it was actually a very intelligent way to attract talent. You had to you often have to hire like a percentage of local workers. You have to work with a
Yeah.
percentage of things. It can be very stimulating, and so I think that the tax break system can be very beneficial to a local economy if it's done correctly. I personally really liked the Michigan one from like an outsider point of view. I don't know from I don't know how contentious it was. Like
Right.
100% is very, very, very high. Like most places don't
Yeah.
even offer any percentage, and you can attract people. But
Yeah.
I find it
I,
very interesting.
Yeah, there are some countries that are that's why some movies are shot in some countries, like you were saying, Justine. George Miller was supposed to make a Justice League movie in what, like 2007, 2008 in Australia, and it was because they were going to have like certain government tax thing and funding and whatnot and then I can think that funding changed when the government changed or something. I'm just
Yeah.
paraphrasing. And that's why that movie never happened, because at the last second just funding changed.
I mean, that is the
Um
risk of the government funding. In Canada, we've dealt with that too, where we've had conservative governments who decide either they decide there's too much money given to it, or under we had a very conservative prime minister for a long time, and it becomes like a nice culture war where you're like the government funded this movie that is offensive and therefore we should
Hmm.
remove all funding. It's like a very classic trope of like cutting costs. So and there's like a lot of cases in the Canadian cinema where you can point like every year to something really really weird that the government does give money to, or it's something that's potentially offensive to somebody. So
Yeah.
it's not hard to do. Like, again, Cronenberg is like a perfect example. It's like you can just point to any one of his films and you can make someone who is a conservative voter in Canada really, really upset.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, this is a subject matter that we just could have just started a whole second
Yeah, we
podcast
don't
on
get
this subject
we don't get into all of that because movie
Yeah.
productions, man. You
Yeah.
want to talk about podcasts? I'm pretty sure they teach whole courses about movie production, the finances of movie production.
Yeah.
I've thought to be mind-numbingly insane, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
like I said, it varies by place, varies by industry. I mean, it's wild, but it's all kind of part of the soup, I guess, that or stew that makes up movies, and then we eventually get Blu-ray releases, we eventually get theatrical exhibition, we get all kinds of things that go into it. It's all part of it all. It's the part of the great tapestry. Stephen, I don't know if you have anything else to say to Justine.
Other than that, this was a great pleasure. We appreciate you taking the time, um, and I hope that we didn't keep you up too late. Um,
Yeah, I
but
know this is late for Stephen. That's why I wanted
well,
to
it's late for everybody.
see if you had
But
anything.
well,
Uh,
sorry, not you.
oh yeah,
Not late
not me.
for
Come
you.
on now. I haven't even
But
started my movie watching for the night yet. I
I
got to
know
figure out
it's
what I'm going to
gotta
watch.
get it going. Gotta see what announcements were out there. But Justine, we appreciate you taking the time, and we can't wait to see. I can't wait to see more of your work in physical media. Is there anything else? I mean, you don't have to give us specific titles, but like, do you have other things that you're working on, whether it's audio commentaries or essays that you're going to be contributing at some point in the future?
I hope so. I mean, there's some that I can think of, but they're too early. They're not set
Yeah,
in
yeah,
stone. But I'm hoping to. I really enjoy it. I haven't seen The Picnic at Hanging Rock, so I'm really excited to watch that one.
great,
Oh, I can't wait.
awesome. Well, Justine, if there's places where people can connect with you or other
Or
things
see
that
your
you want
work.
to, yeah, see your work or other play or like I know you have a Patreon. Is that something that you still run? I know I was gonna
Yeah.
say, are you still using it?
No, not at the moment. I wouldn't recommend sending out to my Patreon at the moment. I would just check out my Twitter and my Instagram at Red Room Rantings, and I'll share most of the things that I'm proud of there. And I do
All right.
post a lot, so you could always engage with me. I don't mind. So you can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, you do have a
Awesome.
letterboxd as well, but I don't know if that's more for personal use.
Oh no, I'm happy to share that, but I can never remember. It's a different username than Red Room Rantings. I think or is it? You could look up Justine Smith on that one.
Yes, that's kind of how I found it.
Yeah.
It's yeah, I was actually going to talk to you, but we're exiting now. Just saying
Yeah,
that
we're
you and
exiting.
I
Let's
both
not,
have
let's
this
not mess
one of
up
the
the
same
landing.
favorites. Yeah,
But yeah, please.
you and I both have one of the same favorites in the red shoes. That's
Oh
I
yeah,
found
I'm
the connection.
obsessed. Yeah, I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah.